when I got made redundant, rather than trying to sort of launch my own practice, because I knew living in North Wales, that's going to be quite heavily compliance based. It's going to be a tax return factory. And that really didn't have any attraction to me at all.
You're listening to episode 121 of the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast that helps UK tax professionals improve their tax careers, become qualified, and to become an all-round better tax professional. I'm your host, Jack Bonehill. I work in tax as an employment tax director, won Tolley's Taxation's Rising Star Award in 2023, and have helped hundreds of tax professionals improve their tax skills through my training courses. At the start of this episode, you heard from Andrew Rainford, our guest for this episode, who's been a tax editor for 10 years now, and is currently working for Lefebvre. By the end of this episode, you will have an insight into the role of a tax editor, giving you a feel for whether you might want to someday be a tax editor yourself. And if you do, Andrew shares some excellent advice to help you with this. One of the things I love about working in tax is there's actually lots of different directions you can take your career in, but the problem is that most of us don't know about the ones outside of the obvious, which are working in accountancy firms or moving in-house. And I'm hoping podcast episodes like this one, which I call Tax Roll Insights, will help spread more awareness around these. For rough timings for each section of this episode, head on over to the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP121. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP121. And TTPP121 just stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast, episode 121. Lefebvre, who Andrew works for, has the best AI tool for tax research that I've used to date. It's called Genial, which is part of their Tax Essentials offering. And in the show notes, there's details around that if you'd like more information or potentially even a demo. I've used that tool a lot of times now, and it always makes the information finding aspect of tax research much easier and much quicker. But without further ado, let's get to the episode. If you don't mind then, Andrew, could you just tell us a little bit about you, your tax career, and how you became a tax editor?
Yeah, sure. So straight out of university, I got a job in public sector audit, actually, with it's now defunct, the Audit Commission. So looking at accounts for local councils and NHS trusts, and that was a graduate training role. And that was 20 years ago this summer. I actually decided to switch to tax after sitting the short tax exam on the CIPFA qualification and thinking, actually, I find this quite interesting. I started in practice in 2007 and qualified whilst working for a firm in Blackfriars in London. I did my ATT in 2008 and finally finished my CTA in 2012. About the same time, I submitted a response to the Readers Forum in Taxation magazine, and that was published. And sometime later, I got an email from the then editor, Richard Curtis, asking me to send over an invoice. And I wasn't actually aware that you got paid for sending responses in. So it was quite a nice surprise. And I asked him is there a chance that I might be able to start writing articles? And I was writing maybe one every 3 months or so to get published in taxation. So that's how I started in writing. Then in 2014, I actually got made redundant. So I upped the writing side of things to try and make up for the income loss. I was put in touch with Tony Court, who I know you had on the show recently, and became a regular contributor to his newsletter, which is called Tips and Advice Tax, published by Lefebvre. They had also just launched a new newsletter for advisors called Tax for Professionals, and I was offered a chance to submit a monthly article for that as well. And then after a year, I was offered the role of editor of that newsletter, and I jumped at the chance. Yeah, and 10 years later, I'm still there, so I think it's definitely the right move.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds to me like you're always interested in the writing side then, because if you were submitting response to the Taxation magazine and then asking to write, it sounds like you already had an interest in that. Do you know where that came from?
Not really. I mean, when I was at school, I used to enjoy sort of writing short stories and things. And then back when I worked in practice, probably the best part of the job was sort of writing up client reports and having that challenge of explaining something that can be quite complex and trying to get that across to a client in a way that's relatively easy to understand without sort of filling it with lots of technical language. So yeah, I guess it came from that. You're a tax advisor as well. We sort of tend to have that natural ability to understand technical content. So being able to sort of explain it to help other people was quite a draw, but getting paid to do it as well was a nice bonus. So it kind of perhaps influenced the interest a little bit as well.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, it's funny you should say that you enjoy report writing though, because that's the thing I probably hate the most. I've never been a writer.
I always preferred doing research and the writing up to the compliance side of things, definitely. So before I was trying to sort of wind down the compliance side, but that's why when I got made redundant, rather than trying to sort of launch my own practice, because I knew living in North Wales, that's going to be quite heavily compliance based. It's going to be a tax return factory, and that really didn't have any kind of attraction to me at all. So I thought if I can make a go of it with the writing, then I'd rather do that. And of course, we've got the qualifications. We can always fall back on them at any time. So
For what it's worth, I actually do enjoy the research bit, so I enjoy doing anything but the actual writing up of it. The writing up for me is the worst bit.
fair enough.
Which is actually probably ironic because obviously I did do some articles for you a few years back. And for me, actually, that was more to help prove the concept around that the podcast and everything related to it could generate money, to prove to my wife that it's okay me going down to 4 days a week. So, which is why I ended up dropping it quite quickly once I started getting other income from it.
You were actually one of the better contributors, if you like. I think we'll probably talk in a little bit about getting in contributors, but sometimes it can be quite difficult to sell the concept and sort of convince them to adapt their writing. But I remember you did a very good job on.
Oh, thank you. It's kind of you to say. So back to the tax editing side of things then. So why is it that you did decide to then get into tax editing? Because I'm presuming it's quite different to just writing, which is almost where you started out.
It is, and it isn't. I mean, it was a natural progression from writing, really. So when I took over the Tax for Professionals newsletter, I started out I was still writing probably half of the content. I did inherit some external contributors, but I've picked it up over time. So the role has gradually shifted more towards my role now on the newsletters, especially, is more about commissioning and then editing rather than writing. But yeah, it's a bit of a mixed role. There is some writing and there is some editing, but it was just there was an opportunity for a full-time role. Initially, it was on a freelance basis, but the lady that was doing the content editing job left because I was one of the more regular writers. And I had a working relationship with somebody else at the company. They asked if I wanted to give it a go. And yeah, I jumped at the chance.
Yeah, I never looked back since, I suppose, being about 10 years or so now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It's been very well looked after, I must say.
I suppose connected to this, and I think it nicely leads on to the next question. What does the role of a tax editor look like? So I know you're going to be able to have your own experiences here to talk about, and it might look slightly different to other places, but I suppose, generally speaking, what does the role of a tax editor look like? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, we can break it down into a few sort of subcategories, really. I mean, the first one, obviously, editing. I guess if I talk about it in context of the role, it might make it easier. So for the newsletters, that's relatively smooth each month. I tend to agree a topic with the particular contributor for each issue. The newsletters are in a standard format, so the word counts are always the same. They know what they're aiming for, and then they send it over to me by the deadline. I go through it to ensure they're all in-house style, because the newsletters we have are house publications rather than, say, editorial collections. Some of the monthly journals are. But my contributors are all quite good. They've adapted to the writing style for the newsletter over time. So that side of things is actually usually very smooth. And it just becomes about maybe reordering things so that they flow better. Or I know you've seen the newsletters. We have these sort of little points called pro advice points, where you might have a section of text and then there's almost like a light bulb moment out. And sometimes it's the contributor's not picked up that should be an advice point, or that it's worthy of being an advice point, if you like, and going through it that way. And then, as I mentioned, I do still write articles. So looking at writing, what I write these days tends to mainly be the topical news items and case write-ups. I really enjoy looking at cases and pulling out, well, okay, here's the case, that's the decision, but why is it important to other advisors? Because I think it's easy to forget cases have implications. Even it's not your client in court, but if they're doing something similar, then it can have a wider application than just the person involved in the case. So the platform that we publish this on, the Tax for Essentials for Advisors, also has longer publications, not just the newsletter. So we call these special reports, and they tend to be sort of 40 to 60 pages, usually focusing on either topical stuff, where things change, or on sort of tax saving ideas that are easy to implement and obviously within the law. And these are almost all written in-house. We probably write 3 or 4 a year. Some examples of recent titles that I've done was one on preparing for the end of the FHL regime when that was announced last year. What kind of steps to do to ensure that you're not missing out on relief that you're entitled to inadvertent. I also did one a couple of years ago, which is due to be updated, called Sole Trade Partnership or Company. And that's looking at the choice of trading vehicle, with lots of calculations of different tax and national insurance, depending on a whole range of scenarios, comparing and contrasting to help people to make that decision. I'm also working on a new title at the moment, actually, which will be coming out later this year, about tax-efficient succession planning for business owners. And the trigger for that, or the springboard for that, if you like, is the forthcoming changes we've got to business property relief. So I'm hoping that one will be quite well received. Yeah, another thing within the role, this is quite recent actually, it was an initiative I suggested to my manager and he quite liked the idea of, was publishing a fortnightly tax update video. So that tends to come out every other Friday. And all that is just it's like a slideshow with a voiceover, a quick roundup of some recent news, HMRC updates and cases. And they're about 6 minutes long and we publish them for free on YouTube. Another sort of string to the bow, if you like, is about finding writers. I do sometimes get new contributors by recommendation. I think you yourself came recommended by a mutual colleague or associate, shall we say, former colleague of mine. Or I'll get an email, like a direct approach from them offering service, would you like an article on this? But sometimes I do have to go and find somebody, and usually what I'll do is, if I want somebody to write on a particular topic, I'll have a look around some of the other publishing houses, see who's been writing about that particular topic in recent years, and then have a look to see if I think the writing style might be a good fit. I've actually picked up some really high quality contributors that have become regulars that way, including Lucy Webb and Neil Warren for me. I think overall I've got 4 regular contributors that are sending in monthly articles, and then I've got another 5 or 6 that they come up with ideas as and when, or I've got them there if I need something specific and I know it's in an area that they're quite strong at. And then sometimes there can be a bit of competition for places because I've got so many contributors now. Quite disciplined. I'm quite careful that I don't overcommission individual issues, because what I don't want to get into a situation is that I've got a really good article, but there's no room for it, and it ends up being rejected. So as a rule, if the article's up to scratch, it'll get published, but I just have to be quite careful about sort of managing expectations. So what I won't do is sort of ask them to write something and then sit on it for 3 months. I'm sure you can imagine if I've got a full issue and then the Chancellor drops an absolute tax bombshell, I've got to get that into the next issue. So we do have to push things back because the topical stuff is going to have priority. We do have regular news feeds on the platform as well, so our subscribers don't miss out on being kept up to date with topical stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose really, prior to speaking to you, not just today, but other times as well, because we spoke about this a bit before, haven't we? But I suppose your role is other than just a tax editor, really, or at least it seems like it based on the name of the title. Because when I think about the tax editing, I think about, like, let's say you've got a magazine or something and you're essentially responsible for making sure that magazine goes out with the articles in every month and you edit them. I wouldn't have thought much about an editor also writing, so I don't know whether that's unique to your role. I'm guessing the finding of the people isn't unique to your role, finding the writers, that is, deciding on pieces to publish, but you've also got extra elements as well, haven't you, in your role?
Yes, oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, I think the thing is, because we're relatively small compared to some of the larger, more mainstream publishing houses, we're in that position where my role does tend to blend a few things together. So at a larger publisher, you'd probably have a team of content editors and their job will just be updating a particular publication every year or on the fly to do it in real time. That'll be their full-time job. Completely separately, you'll probably have a commissioning editor who seeks out new contributors and deals with actually contracting out the work. And then you've probably got content editors at Lefebvre. We do it with quite a small but very efficient teams. I think that's actually quite nice. I get to do a bit of everything. I can imagine if you were doing the same thing all the time, it would tend to be a little bit monotonous, but I've been very happy for 10 years. And we're doing new things all the time. Tony and I have a couple of ideas. We've always got irons in the fire. Some of them work out, some of them don't. But it's nice to know that we're not sort of stuck in a sort of we're not one trick ponies, if you like.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Just wrapping back a little bit. So you mentioned about how your process now is quite smooth in terms of the editing side of things. Have you got any stories or examples where that hasn't gone smoothly that you could share?
Yeah, I guess some people, and I must say, thankfully, very few in my experience, do tend to take it quite personally if you make editorial changes. They take it as it being criticism, whereas the majority of the time it is just changes to get things into the house publication style. And that could be really little things like whether or not you put dots between EG and things like that, because different publishing houses have different approaches. I must mention, I did have one person who sent in an article. I think it was on national insurance from memory. It was going back quite a while now. Perfectly correct technically, but the way it was written was so dense, I had to simplify it. So there were quite a lot of changes. Ended up saying exactly the same thing. The flow, and they just said, look, no, that's not mine. I'm not letting you publish it. But that is the only occasion that happened, thankfully. But yeah, I've been very lucky with the contributors I've picked up because they tend to be writers already. I've been able to have a look before approaching them. So by the time I've commissioned them to do something, I've got a rough idea of what I'm going to get. I don't think I've ever had to reject an article for not being up to screen. Or in fact, once, and that was a lady who had about 3. It did get published eventually, but I had to send it back a couple of times. So that can be challenging, is sort of managing. I don't know if ego is the right thing, but sometimes people take things the wrong way. And because we're dealing with things mainly by email, maybe there's an element of giving the wrong impression. So sort of trying to manage that in a positive way and managing advice points, explaining why you've changed things as well, rather than just changing it and saying, well, there it is, that's the edit. I've always tried, particularly with new contributors, to sort of give a list of things explaining I've changed this because, and explaining it like that. And I tend to find that then sort of reduces any potential friction.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I mean, to be fair, because I think I did one article for you where I think you said something like, I've had to do quite a lot of reframing. And I remember looking at that one and there was like the red pen all over it. And it was one of those where I felt bad because you had to make a lot of changes for one. And then secondly, like the thing for me, the only thing that was annoying wasn't that you'd reframed it, because I'm completely fine with that and I'm all for improvements. But then after I'd spent, say, 4 hours writing it already, and I didn't really have time to fit in making those extra changes too, that's the thing that was frustrating for me at the time. But I suppose a writer should probably build in the fact that that might happen. I was just fairly inexperienced at that at the time, so I didn't really expect that to happen, but it did.
Yeah. But I know full well you took those changes on board because you did another 3 or 4 for me and they were pretty much bang on, weren't they? So there was never that. You didn't have the red pen for the second one.
No. The thing I remember finding hardest, actually, for your articles, it wasn't the main body of the article, if that's what you call them, but it was like the little summary bit at the start and the little summary bit at the end. That was the bit I really found it difficult to get my head around. So I don't think I ever got that right, really.
Do you know what? It took me about a year to get it when I first started. But yeah, that can, a lot of people find that a challenge. So, because it's not like anything else. It's not an intro and a summary. It kind of has, you have to be able to read them together and pretty much get the most important salient points out of the article without having to read the body text. That's the challenge, especially when you're looking at something that, so I don't think you should feel too bad about that at all, because you're certainly not the only one.
Yeah.
and myself included.
I never felt too bad about it. I think it would probably take me maybe 4 more times before it was pretty much there every time. But obviously I threw in the towel before that, before it got that far. I don't think I've ever told you this actually before, but in my application, when I went for Taxation's Rising Star, Tolley's Taxation's Rising Star in 2023, I actually used as an example that one where you reframed it in inverted commas. And just as an example that, like, I was, I suppose, trying something different out. Most of them were good, but sometimes you get feedback because it could be better. And even though it was frustrating, that I learned from it. And I imagine the judges reading that quite liked it at the time, that it wasn't just someone with an ego going, oh, screw the tax editor, they don't know what they're talking about, I'm better. Being a bit humble, I suppose, and taking on board the points to improve.
Yeah, you touch on an important point. I think I don't want to use the word criticism. I'll use the word you use. Feedback has to be constructive, which I have. I started out as a freelance writer and I've worked for places that are very, very good at doing it. And I've worked for places that are very, very bad doing it. And I was determined to be in the pool with the former.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good skill to have in the tax profession, full stop, whether you're in editing or in an accountancy firm or in-house, because you've got colleagues that you're working with and you need to be able to tell them when something could be better without it upsetting them. And I mean, you can't get that right 100% of the time because people have emotions at the end of the day and they'll take some things wrong, won't they? But, you know, if you're not upsetting them in most cases, you're doing it right, probably. So what would you say then that you enjoy about being a tax editor? So I got a bit of a feel for that from what you said already, but what is it that you like the most?
No timesheets. That was actually a massive relief when I left practice. I was working Big Four firm previously. And as you'll know yourself, because I imagine you still have to do them in the day job, but the timesheet increments there was 6 minutes. So you had to account for your time every 6 minutes. So if your time that's gone on to client codes fell below a certain threshold, you'd be kind of asked to explain yourself on a monthly basis. And it was quite difficult because I was trying to work my way up, obviously, the ladder. And that meant taking on, they didn't call them trainees, but junior staff, if you like. And a lot of time was sort of dedicated to development, which would have had an impact on billable hours. And looking back, I think it probably did cause a lot of stress. I know it's pretty standard practice in our industry, but I am glad that kind of thing's behind me. The best part really, though, is that I get to do something I think I'm good at and also enjoy. I've always enjoyed, as I say, writing up client reports and that challenge of trying to make complicated things simple to understand.
It sounds to me like a big part of it actually is, because you've said it a few times throughout, it's about that simplification and helping someone else to understand something that's complicated. That seems to be important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's not just in tax. I find that out in my personal life as well, whether it be with my children, helping them with schoolwork, teaching my son about car mechanics and things like that. And seeing there's an immense sense of satisfaction to pass on knowledge in that way. I guess it might sound a bit old-fashioned, but I'm probably the oldest 43-year-old going, so.
Yeah, to be fair, we both share that in common, actually. I do like I suppose, taking something complex, making it simple and helping others understand. It's partly the reason why I started the podcast. It's partly the reason why I do my masterclasses as well. It's partly the reason I'm a tax advisor, because I wanted to help clients do something with something that's complex and make it simple for them as well.
I must say, I know I'm sort of half joking about the timesheets, but I do sometimes miss client work, because I've always had a good rapport with my clients. I really enjoy going out and meeting them and doing a good job. At the end of the day, we're advisors. It's what we're there to do. But, if you enjoy it as well, then so much the better.
Mm. Would you say that's the only thing you miss, though, about being in practice?
Well, I work remotely, so it can be a little bit isolating. I've made friends that were former colleagues, so I can sometimes miss working in that environment. But we've got a good team. We're all talking to each other all the time. So it's not as bad as it might be. And I've got kids at home to keep me busy and distracted as well.
So it's not quite the same as having a colleague to talk to or something. I think my wife got offended sometimes after COVID when I was talking about how it would be nice to speak to other people sometimes. For me, it's just about variety more than anything, because I can't talk to anyone for all of the time.
The cabin fever set in, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we were all struggling with it, weren't we, at the time? It wasn't an enjoyable period.
So what, for you then, you touched upon one bit that's clearly challenging about being an editor, but is there anything else that you think is challenging about being an editor? And have you got any other stories to share in this regard?
Well, I suppose you've always got, because we've got quite a small, the tax world is quite relatively small. There is always the worry about sort of plagiarism, and we did have to let one contributor go because we'd frequently see he'd send us an article, we'd publish it, and then within a month you'd see it in 2 or 3 other places. I do literally mean word for word identical. So it wasn't just an article on the same topic, it was just cut and paste. That puts the firm in jeopardy because we're publishing stuff that's being published elsewhere, and obviously the other firms as well. But luckily, because if the tax world is small, the tax publishing world even smaller, so it's usually quite easy to spot. And again, that only happened once, but we do have to keep an eye out for it.
So the person didn't plagiarise anyone else's work, but they used the same article that they wrote and distributed it to multiple publishers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, it's something because when we get a new contributor in, they have to sign an author's agreement, and part of that is surrounding that area, and that can be sometimes misunderstood, that they're not allowed to write about the same subject, but that's not the case at all. I mean, all we ask is that if you're writing an article on a similar topic for somewhere else, start with a blank piece of paper. It was a bit cheeky. It was going back a good while now, but, as I say, we're all sort of scouring for news and things every day, so it is quite easy to spot.
It's an interesting one, because I wouldn't have thought when you mentioned the word plagiarism to me before, I was thinking about them stealing someone else's article.
Well, there could be that as well. Yeah. The way it works in publishing is once you submit the work and it's been approved, it belongs to the publisher. So if it's published on a Monday when it's out and it's live, that belongs to the publisher. It'll be in the contract between them and the contributor. So if they then send it somewhere else, they are effectively committing plagiarism. I mean, what you've said is also a valid concern, and that may be more difficult to spot because obviously a lot of stuff that's out there that has been published is sitting behind a paywall, so it's not like it would come up. But I think because the way we publish the articles is quite different, that would be quite difficult to do, to just sort of cut and paste from, say, something from Simon's Taxes or something like that. It would stick out like a sore thumb. So I think that is probably a lot easier to spot than somebody reusing their own articles from elsewhere, or indeed from us to elsewhere.
Yeah, it makes sense. In terms of technical then and keeping up to date, how do you do that then, not being in practice anymore?
Yeah. Well, I'm frequently writing. That obviously requires a lot of research, and I'm reading articles on an almost daily basis from contributors as they come in. So that's part of it covered. But I do obviously have my formal CPD requirements with the CIOT as well. So I do quite a lot of sort of CPD courses online, specifically around tax. So I get plenty of hours in that respect. And sometimes I do get asked, not by clients, but, somebody might read an article and ask for a bit more information. So I'll do 1,000 words. So there's a bit of research as well from an advisor to advisor.
So I think we've touched upon this a little bit already throughout, but can tax editing roles tend to be different dependent on how big the firm is or small it is, or just different roles? Because yours seems quite unique. And do you know, like in some of the other places, is the role completely different, or the common elements? Like how does that tend to be?
There'll be common elements. I think we are quite unique because what we've got on our platform is quite different to most other things, which I know a lot of people are moving online nowadays, whereas with us, we try to be a little bit more dynamic and focused on the advice end, in the tangible kind of stuff for the advisors. So yeah, you're right though. I think if you were to go to a large publisher, the roles will tend to be quite specialist. So again, whereas I'm doing commissioning, writing and editing, that would probably be 3 separate jobs at a large publishing firm.
Yeah. Would they still all be called editors, or would only the person that's editing the article would be called, and then would the one that's commissioning be called a commissioner or something, if you see what I mean? Does that make sense?
I mean, the commissioning editor might be editing the articles that come in, but then for me, a content editor would be, I mean, just to use an example, let's say I'm a publisher, 6 tax books on, say, income tax, capital gains tax. They get updated annually. That would be the content editor's role. Whereas over here, I've got a newsletter that's going monthly. I'm commissioning articles and editing those. So one is kind of fundamental guidance, if you like, and one is more topical kind of news stuff. So commissioning editor there would be responsible for agreeing what goes in and sort of keeping an eye on it, but it wouldn't involve as much kind of technical update, because if you're paying somebody to write the article, you're going to expect it to be technically correct. So it becomes more of I wouldn't think you'd have to be a tax expert to be a commissioning editor per se. You might need to have a rough idea, but you probably wouldn't need years of experience in practice. Whereas if you were a content editor, you are going to have to be quite technically savvy. But yeah, as you say, at Lefebvre, we're quite small, so we do have to sort of be a bit of a jack of all trades.
Yeah, which makes sense. Really, yours is just a much more varied role than, say, you'd get in some of these bigger places.
Definitely, but I see that as a positive thing, because no 2 days are the same, because it's quite flexible in how I can line up the work. I can look at my week and say, right, I'm going to be working on articles on this day. I'm going to be looking at sort of one-shots and special reports on this day. Set aside this day for doing some research and catching up with my contributors. And it's quite nice to have that rather than just a long sort of to-do list that just gets worthy, because I could imagine just churning through stuff. I don't think it would be the role for me.
No, that's fair enough. So my last 2 questions relate to, like, now for people that like the sound of this, they like the sound of being an editor and might want to become one day basically. So the first question for you on this is, what are the type of businesses that you can work for as an editor? So just so people can get a bit of a flavour for the type of places they can work to do something like this.
Yeah, I mean, there are several tax and accountancy publishers in this country, ranging from large to small. Having said that, the skills that you pick up are transferable. For example, with me, 10 years working in editing, it's about managing deadlines and knowing what's going where, to who and to when. Those skills could transfer. I could probably go to work for any publisher. I'm fairly sure I could hit the ground running.
That makes sense, yeah. So I suppose the thing I'm thinking of as well then is, so you've got like publishers that publish, say, books and guidance. Then you have like magazine publishers as well, which I'm guessing is like different to the rest. Although I suppose editing, you're still editing at the end of the day, even if it's just something slightly different. So I suppose even within the role of an editor, you can do different things of it, as you've already mentioned throughout the episode anyway, about larger versus smaller, etc. as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So as a last question on this then, for people who are interested in being a tax editor, whether it's soon or long in the future, what is your advice to help them get to that point?
I would say start by writing. It's a relatively small world, so the main opportunities are quite easy to find. So have a look at a few publishers, find out who's responsible for the publications, and just offer your services. Would you like some help? Try writing articles for the main magazines or journals. And there's actually quite a few more out than just the obvious ones. And if you find you enjoy it, then consider offering editorial services on a freelance basis. So that might include updating these kind of manuals on an annual basis, taking responsibility for a couple of chapters or something like that. It's easier to get into it, I think, on a freelance basis than to sort of find full-time roles. They tend to come up less often. I've seen a few recently, but obviously if you're doing it on a freelance basis, you're going to be making connections. And word of mouth is quite a big thing in this industry. If you do a good job for somebody, they'll mention you to somebody else and recommend you, and it can kind of spiral from there.
Yeah, it's a good idea actually about being responsible for editing basically part of a book or something like that. That's a good idea. I suppose when you've got those big providers out there that have like 20 chapters in a book, you could end up just updating 3 of them or something, which I think what you're saying, which, that's a really nice thought, I think.
3 or 4, yeah. Absolutely. That does tend to be how it goes. The only work I've ever done where I've been responsible for updating a whole book are books that I've written myself. So I've got one with Claritex on the enterprise investment scheme and the other venture capital schemes that I've written. So it's my responsibility, but that doesn't need doing every year. It's less of a burden because changes with things like that tend to come out a little bit less often.
That's one of the things that put me off writing my own book, because the thought of having to update it maybe every year, every 2 years is a nightmare for me.
Yeah, especially, I mean, we obviously, as I say, with the longer stuff, we do some of it because what we call evergreen content. So if I've got a report that I wrote on profit extraction, obviously that needs updating every year. I think it's about 50, 60 pages long. But I could imagine if you've got a book on income tax, say, it could be 600 pages long as a minimum. And if you've got a lot of numerical examples, and well, every time they tweak with the national insurance rates or things like that, you're going to have to go through, not just update the content, but sit and do quite a lot of calculations by hand every year, which could be, you can quite quickly see why that would be too much for one person to do.
Yeah, for sure. Just for people then that would like to get in contact, whether it's you directly, Andrew, because they're just interested in maybe asking you some questions, or in relation to Lefebvre to see what you guys know, where are the best places for them to go?
Well, we've got a website. If you search for Tax Essentials for Advisors, that'll get you to our landing page. There's a fair bit of free content on there and more information if you'd be interested in having a demo. It's a great platform, in my opinion, punches well above its weight. And it's obviously less costly than some of the other ones out there. I did mention that tax update videos available to watch for free on our YouTube channel, which is at lefebvre.uk. I'll send you over the link, Jack, if you want to put it in the description for my fortnightly tax update videos. But you also get quite a lot of other stuff on there, like employment law stuff and HR news and updates. And as I say, that's freely available on the YouTube channel, so worth checking out. And if anybody wants to write to me, it's andrew.a.rainford at lefebvre-uk.co.uk, and I'll give you the email address again, Jack. You can put it on there if anybody wants to. If anyone's got any questions.
So hopefully you enjoyed the insight into being a tax editor. And if you're someone that enjoys writing and simplifying complex information into something simple, then being a tax editor could be for you. One thing I didn't appreciate before speaking to Andrew was the variety of different editing roles that are available out there, and all the different layers that go into publishing, including the commissioning side, the writing side, and the editing side. And if you are interested in becoming a tax editor, I suggest you take Andrew's advice and look for some writing opportunities now, even if you are writing for the tax magazines initially, because as Andrew says, the tax publishing world is so small, and so the more you get your name out, the better. There's one thing that many people working in tax avoid, but it's the same thing that will accelerate your career if you get good at it. No, it's not sucking up to your boss. It's tax research. Tax research is a high-value skill because promotions, advisory work, and trust are given to the person who can find the right answer, explain it clearly, and back it up. This will all make you a highly valuable member of your team, and you'll be on your way to becoming an exceptional tax advisor. If you're ATT qualified, or if you're nearly or recently CTA, and you've ever thought, my colleagues will just tell me the answer, or it's too hard, this is for you to take you from team burden to team superstar. A lot of people I speak to struggle because they don't know where to start their research. They also become overwhelmed with the volume or complexity of the information, and they also struggle to understand what it is they're reading. Does this sound familiar to you? Let's fix that. I run the Tax Research Masterclass, which is delivered over 2 live sessions. You'll get a list of key legislation and guidance, recordings, and a repeatable method to tackle all research tasks. Over 150 people, from juniors to senior managers, from firms including Grant Thornton and other top 50 firms, have taken my Tax Research Masterclass. Don't just take my word for how it helps people. As Tammy, a chartered tax advisor, put it, it's less the time taken to find relevant answers. And Gianluca, who's ATT qualified, said, I always found it difficult to navigate the legislation and the sheer amount of HMRC manuals, but after attending Jack's Tax Research Masterclass, I now have a clear idea of where to start and how to proceed. Jack's course is extremely entertaining and helpful. During the masterclass, you'll learn where to start your research and take it through all the way to completion. You'll learn how to use legislation, HMRC guidance and case law confidently without constantly going down rabbit holes. You'll learn how to record your conclusions and findings in an appropriate way, and you'll learn to stand out from your peers, become more valuable to your firm, and move quicker towards the role that you want, even if this is a senior role like senior manager, director, or partner. I'm Jack Bonehill, host of the Tax Professionals podcast and winner of Tolly's Taxation Rising Star Award in 2023, and this is the training I wish I'd had early in my tax career. If you like the sound of what I'm saying, join the next Tax Research Masterclass starting on the 24th of September 2025. Head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TRM for more info and to grab your spot. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TRM, where TRM stands for Tax Research Masterclass. A link is also in the show notes. The show notes for this episode are at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP121. That's /TTPP121, which just stands for the Tax Professional Podcast, episode 121. And in the show notes, there's links and all the information promised throughout this episode, along with links to helpful resources too. If you enjoyed this episode, you can make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes by subscribing to email notifications. A link to do that is also in the show notes. But that's it for this episode of the Tax Professionals Podcast. If you like this one, chances are you'll like at least one of the other 120 episodes too that are out there, so why not go and take a look? You can always listen when you're driving or undertaking a mundane everyday task. But I hope you found the episode useful and have taken away something that will help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career. Until next time.